fiercely assail. In every speech it's the villain they unveil. From racism, patriarchy they rail. Ain't known, ain't nothing, and where they prevail. Ushering in their Marxist utopias, the end game. The turmoil strike they aim to overthrow the old, establish their claim. In the vision they abolish everything. Maybe capitalism for the pain of clever life. These are the four goals of the woke. Embedded in actions, words they evoke. From pushing and wearing monsters' dreams in the dance of power, scheme and scheme. In every move, search and the please. Remember, nothing's ever as it seems. So, it's true and so. Gain power, destabilize, bring capitalism into democracy, utopia. That's what they want, that's what they want. Abolish capitalism. These are the four goals of the woke. Embedded in actions, words they invoke. From pushing and wearing Marxist dreams in the dance of power, scheme and scheme. In every move, search and the themes. Remember, nothing's ever as it seems. So, it's true and true.
Hey, everyone. Happy Sunday. Well, we have a rare Sunday special stream today because you guys know a good chunk of my week was taken up with libertarian politics. I thought I had escaped libertarian politics. I really did. For those of you who I'll give it a little too long, didn't read from my backstory, just in case people are new. I was a Democrat back in 2020. I left the Democratic Party after being a Democrat for 20 years. I kind of jumped on the MAGA train just because at that time, the Libertarian Party did nothing for me at that time, even though I was really more libertarian in my head. They had Joe Jorgensen as the presidential candidate. I didn't really like that at all. Joe Jorgensen was tweeting Black Lives Matter and all this stuff. I was like, I'm not going to be a libertarian. Trump wants to get critical race theory out of the federal government. That's good enough for me. And so I was kind of on the Trump train. And then after Biden took office, the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus actually kind of came and recruited me. We had beer, we had pretzels. We talked about the difference between like what the Mises Caucus wanted to do and the Libertarian Party. This is way back in 2021. And I was completely on board because at that point I had been lobbying for anti-CRT bill in New Hampshire. And it was the Republicans who ended up sabotaging the bill in New Hampshire. And so I was good and pissed off at the Republican Party because there was just no need for them to sabotage the anti-CRT bill. So I basically joined the Mises Caucus. I joined the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. I was involved from the beginning of 2021 all the way up through, all throughout the entire year of 2022, but I was a delegate at the national convention in Reno when the Libertarian Party, when the Mises Caucus did take over the Libertarian Party. I was so excited about it. I was psyched to see what they were going to do. And I won't go into all the details of it. I was found wanting. I was found very disappointed in the results. And it wasn't all the fault of the Mises Caucus, to be honest. There was also just like the Libertarian Party is notorious for infighting. And it's kind of like if you think that you look at other political spheres and you see drama, you do not know drama until you are involved in the Libertarian Party. I promise you that. And so, I think that Angela McArdle was handed a near impossible task. And there were reasons for that were beyond the Mises Caucus. I also grew to be very disappointed in the Mises Caucus, in Michael Heiss. There was basically an incident in New Hampshire where the Mises Caucus doesn't exist in New Hampshire anymore. The Mises Caucus hasn't existed in New Hampshire for a long time. There are a lot of reasons for that. And actually, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire doesn't actually really exist as a functional political party. They don't actually do anything in the state of New Hampshire. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire is literally just a Twitter account now. So lots lots of disappointing things. But the thing is, and we'll dispel any rumors right off the top because I've already had members of the Mises Caucus tell me that I left the Libertarian Party. I, in fact, haven't left the Libertarian Party. I still consider myself to be a libertarian. I basically just backed off from being involved in all the nonsense because it became completely distracting to things I wanted to do, and I refocused on doing my Substack and doing my socialism content and all that. Well, the Libertarian Party convention happens last week, and let's just say it didn't necessarily go the way the Mises Caucus wanted it to go, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And there's been a lot of controversy about Chase Oliver, the presidential nominee for the party, who I actually don't think is that bad, but a lot of people disagree with that. And so I wanted to bring on who I think is one of the most level-headed libertarians that I've had the pleasure of meeting in the last several years. I've always been impressed with DL Cummings. He's just like, you guys are going to love him. He hasn't been on the channel before, but DL Cummings was involved at the convention. He knows everyone. He understands what's going on, and I really wanted to get just like a really level-headed approach to what's going on and just to have a conversation about it. So we are going to be welcoming DL on the podcast today. And if you guys want to follow him, you can do so at Liberty Dad Pod over on Twitter. And I don't know why that Twitter is doing this thing lately where it's doing like these pop-up windows that just never go away. So we'll reload that again so you guys can see it. He is at Liberty Dad Pod over on Twitter, and I strongly recommend that everyone follow him. And we will welcome DL to the channel. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm anxious to have this discussion. So you've been in some dust ups on Twitter ever since the convention.
A few here and there.
Yeah.
Turns out when you it's funny when I criticize people, their opponents are all like cheering and happy and like, yeah, get them. But then when I criticize the opponents, they don't like it so much.
Yeah. Well, and
And
you
in fairness, I
go ahead.
had
Sorry.
strong commentary about it. I did.
So I don't think, were you ever officially in the Mises Caucus?
No,
No, I
no,
didn't think so. I thought you were more of like an outlier.
right. So I would be, a lot of people will say, well, DL, you're basically just, you might as well be in the caucus. Kind of, sort of. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the Mises Caucus and I have friends in the Mises Caucus, but I never really saw a personal need to join any particular caucus. So I
Mhm.
was just like, whatever, I'm going to do my thing. And if I align with you, well, then good. And if I
Mhm.
don't, then we have a disagreement and we'll go from there. And that's just basically been, and part of it is a long time ago. I don't like labels nearly as much because people try to pigeonhole you into something. So I really do my best to just keep it at libertarian. That's it. I don't run with any other labels. I'm like, look, I'm libertarian, and that's it. And if you want to know anything else, then let's have a conversation, because one moment you might think I'm a this, and then the next moment you might think I'm a this.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And so my kind of perception going into the convention was, I was supporting Michael Rectenwald for president. I like, even though I have very strong disagreements with Michael Heiss and the Mises Caucus and Dave Smith and all that, I actually really like Michael Rectenwald. I think Michael Rectenwald's a really good guy, and obviously he and I align on a lot of the anti-Marxist stuff. What were your kind of thoughts going into the convention?
So I was not a supporter of Rechtenwald, but I will say this: going in, I had made up my mind that any of the presidential candidates that we had, any of the major ones, at least, there were some minor ones that you might have heard their name maybe, but like there was like 6 people that were the primary. Any of those, I would have been willing to support. Period. And because when I compare those against, like, say, Biden or Trump, I'm like, these guys are hands down better. End of story. So
Mhm.
I was always willing to support them all. When I went in, I was going in with, my top was Mike Tremont, and then my next was Josh Smith, and then after that it was probably Chase Oliver. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't base this necessarily on who's got the most principled take or whatever. I really try to say, all right, who actually is going to do the things that I think are necessary as a candidate, which is win hearts and minds. And so I really
Mhm.
try to think of all that. And one of the reasons that I really supported Mike Tremont, and I joke about this, is that he talked to my wife. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. It's not like, oh, I'm so, attached to my wife that if you just talk to her, man, you're going to get my vote. Here's my wife is not a libertarian. She hates politics. She's not interested. And we hosted here at the local level, five of the candidates, all of them but Ballet. He wasn't. He had just his name was just starting to pop up at that time, so he did not get in on it. But so it was the other five, and so we hosted it here in Jacksonville at a local level. They came out, and then like the next day, my wife was talking to me, and she was like, "Yeah, this guy is the only one who came up and talked to me, and it sounded very genuine and sincere, like he
Mhm.
really was interested in what she had to say and her thoughts." And I like that because that's what I want an average voter to walk away with. I want them to walk away and be like, man, that person talked to me. And
Mhm.
because as much as we might like to, we may not want to admit it, those kind of things get votes.
Well,
And
yeah.
and that's just how it works. Whether you like it or not, simple things like that get votes. And I'll never forget years ago. So I grew up in a very evangelical, very Republican household. My mom was a diehard Republican. And I remember one time she voted for a Democrat, which about made me fall over. And I asked her, I was like, Mom, I was like, why did you vote for a Democrat? Like, seriously? And this was when I was like 18 or 19. And she said, they came into my restaurant and talked to me. That was it. That like there's no big huge policy thing. Just they came in and talked to her, and the other person did not.
Yeah.
And I've seen that repeatedly. So that was one of the things I was like, I want somebody to, to I want somebody to reach out and talk to somebody that's there that may or may not be a libertarian and make sure that they remember being talked to the next day. That's what I want.
And I think that this is probably something that a lot of people don't understand, especially I think about libertarian politics is like the whole retail politics thing really does matter in terms of like the candidates go around to all the state conventions and they have tables and they do speeches and they meet with people and it's
Mhm.
just like I think that a lot of people may have been surprised at the outcome of who ultimately got the nomination being Chase because they look at, who's on all the big podcasts and who has all the followers on Twitter. But within libertarian politics, and it was libertarian delegates ultimately making the decision, it really is much more about like, have I had a conversation with you? Where do I align with you on policy? It is actually a lot more principled of a stance than just who has the most followers on Twitter, right?
Right. And this same criticism got me in one of those dust ups that we were talking about with the preferred VP nominee, Clint Russell, because he got mad at me when I basically said he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Now, in fairness to him, I wasn't trying, and I tried to clarify this, and I don't think he was interested in it. But what I was saying was like, look, you came as a delegate to because he's in Florida. I said you came as a delegate to the Florida convention, not this last year, but in the year prior to the takeover. So in 2022. So in 2022, he was a delegate to Florida, and he was also a delegate to Reno and he helped do the takeover. But then after that, he wasn't participating in the standard party politics. And so my criticism was like, he didn't do anything and he got mad. And he was like, look, I've been to a bunch of conventions. And I said, you win as a speaker and as a moderator, basically a celebrity. And I'm like, that does not get votes when it comes when it comes down to the delegates, because at the end of the day, and this was part of my criticism of the Mises Caucus, I said a lot of the people there were a lot of people that left after the takeover that were like not that were like opposed to the Mises crowd or some of the messaging or whatnot, but a lot of them didn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, you guys you didn't have the dominance. And then not only that, a lot of your own crowd left and they didn't participate. And so that meant you had even fewer numbers to rely on. So it was definitely important for the people that you wanted to win these elections to go around and do the work. And what I mean by that is like when you compare, like, say, Clint against somebody like Chase or Larry Sharp or Mike Termott, people remember the activism that those other guys did. They remember, holding signs with them, so on and so forth. So when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, people want somebody that they believe is with them, right? And so you've got like a combination of did you reach out and kiss kiss babies and shake enough hands? And then also, did you do enough work? Now, had the Mises Caucus had the numbers that they needed, had they had like the dominant numbers, like say 70, 75% of the audience as Mises members, which I don't know what the actual numbers were, but I suspect it was not even close to that high. Had they had those numbers, they might have been able to rely on the celebrity status. But it only works in that way. So once your numbers fizzle away, then you need what else can you rely on? Well, it's the work that you've put in that people can remember. And it just wasn't there.
Yeah, I have someone in my chat right now commenting on Clint. When Clint Russell was describing Chase's 50 states campaign he campaigned in, Clint basically called it ass kissing. Clint isn't a serious person. I mean, I'll tell you this: Clint Russell has been blocking people left and right on Twitter for even just like not even really criticizing him. So I have literally never criticized Clint publicly. I never
Right.
I didn't think he was a bad guy. I thought he was a conservative. I didn't really think he was libertarian, but I literally never had anything bad to say about him in public. Donnie the Misfit, who is, been
Mhm.
very active on Twitter and is a very good liberty activist, like actually in the real world doing stuff. She levied like one little tiny criticism against Clint, which had to do with the straw poll at the convention. And I think I retweeted. No, what happened is so Clint blocked Donnie just for leveling that criticism. And again, she's a really good liberty activist. She's
Right.
someone that you want to work with. And then I retweeted it, Donnie saying that Clint blocked her. I was like, why is Clint blocking people for asking a question? And I was blocked almost
Right.
immediately. And then
Right.
I actually had someone slide into my DMs, and I won't say who, but he actually does have a lot of followers on Twitter. And he said, Carlin, I never even tweeted about Clint, but I liked Donnie's tweet. And he blocked me because I liked a tweet. And I was
Right.
like, yo, I really do think one of the problems with the Mises Caucus people is because I really think they're addicted to Twitter. I think they are terminally online. I think
Mhm.
they're completely addicted to that platform. And they've created this reality for themselves where, like, everything is about what is going on Twitter. And if it doesn't happen on Twitter and you don't have a lot of followers on Twitter, then it doesn't matter. And it's like, I look back at I got permanently banned from Twitter in like 2022 for like a month. And I was so because I shared the government email address online, which is perfectly fine, but Twitter banned me for it. And
Right.
but I actually think that that was a great thing looking back because I had like a 30-day detox of like I couldn't use Twitter in the way I was using it before. And it really gave me a lot of perspective about it as a platform because as soon as my main account got permanently banned, I basically got disconnected from the Twitter algorithm at that point that was like
Right.
feeding all this like toxic stuff in my feed. And I was like, oh, this is all an illusion. This is just all like we're in the matrix when we're on Twitter. This isn't real. It's
Right.
just like you disconnect. And like after that, I kind of never looked at libertarian politics the same again because I was like, they're just permanently addicted to Twitter. And I really do think that so many of the problems have come from that. And I think that we're seeing the end result of that, which is that they're blocking anyone with the most minor disagreement. They're dismissing them. They think they're people they don't have to interact with. Well, guess what? If you want to represent the Libertarian Party on a national level, you do actually have to talk to libertarians, as it
Right.
turns out, right?
Right.
What do you
And
think?
and you've got to make sure that those who disagree with you still feel like they matter, right?
Yeah,
Because at the end of the so here's the thing. Twitter is like, as Dave Chappelle and a lot of people like to repeat, it's not a real place. However, people on it are real people. And so if you start blocking people, if you start saying really mean things about people, um, you know, even though it's not a real place, the real people behind those accounts may take serious offense to that, right? And if you're not showing other things, like, hey, imagine if it had been balanced and there were lots of video of say Clint. We'll just use Clint just because we're talking about him. But let's say there was a whole bunch of video of him going to maybe protest or speaking before crowds who weren't libertarian. Like kind of like what we see Dave doing, right? I think that it would temper a little bit of the online, because people would say, well, okay, online maybe they're a pain in the ass. I don't know if we're supposed to swear or not,
That's fine.
but in real life they really put the work in, right? And I think it helps temper stuff. And that's what I was trying to get at, was like, at the end of the day, people have to make a decision. And I even stirred up the redhead, because she
Mhm.
jumped in to some of that criticism. And and I had made a comment. I said, look, if Larry Sharp and had been going against Clint, Larry would have won. And they were like, well, they couldn't believe it, because they were like, Larry Sharp won the debate that they previously had, this percent to this percent. And I was like, that's not how incentives work. Choosing who wins a debate in isolation is one thing. But then when you have to cast a vote that is going to impact the party that you've been working hard in, and you just had somebody like Chase Oliver, who's been elected, who people like Clint weren't playing well with, beforehand. That changes the incentive, right? And so this is what I was trying to say. Like, you didn't put in the work so that people would feel confident that when and I'm not talking about the Mises crowd, but probably some of them too. Um, you didn't put in the work in the real world so that people know my vote for you is not going to be wasted. I'm not, they don't want to have a president and a vice president candidate who are just going to clash all the time. Like, why would you
Right.
do that? That doesn't make any sense, right? And so part of that is knowing how well have you played in the sandbox with our own people before. And if you haven't been playing in the sandbox and you haven't demonstrated it, that's going to go against you in certain circumstances. Circumstances being when you don't have the crowd, the dominance of the crowd.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Chase Oliver then, because I think that he actually has done, I mean, a pretty amazing job, to be honest. And I first started paying attention to Chase when he basically got the Georgia Senate race into a
Mhm.
runoff in 2022. And it's like, and I don't I disagree very strongly with some of Chase's positions, but even back then I was like, yo, that was impressive. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's an impressive he ran a statewide race. He got over 81,000 votes. He got 2% of the vote. I mean, that might not seem like a lot, and I know that Republicans like to make fun and say, "Oh, enjoy your 3%," but in that case, 2% of the vote literally did cost the Republicans that Senate seat. I mean, it did.
Right.
And so it's like they can joke all they want, but that's a lot of power. And the way that he got that, my perception of it is that he was out campaigning, he was going to all these local events, he was meeting people, he was talking to people. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, he has a proven track record of doing this. And then he went right from that Senate campaign and started almost immediately campaigning for president, and going to all 50 states is incredibly impressive as a libertarian, and
Mhm.
raising all that money and having the staff to do it. And it's like, again, I was in favor of Rechtenwald. If I was a delegate, I would have voted for Rechtenwald. But I thought it was undeniable in the back of my head. I was like, Chase Oliver is actually the one out there that's doing the work that can do this. And would it be the worst thing in the world if he got the nomination? I mean, I kind of don't think so.
Right. I don't think so either. So let's be clear about what Chase did. So when Chase, and I pulled it up so I can give you exact numbers.
Hmm.
In the first election, when Chase was in it, there were a total of 3,935,924 votes. In the runoff, it dropped down to 3.5 million. So 3,500,000, 3,541,877. So you had basically the difference of about 400,000 votes, that fewer, right? And that's a big deal, because the question is who might have received those votes. And so when we cause a runoff like that, that means that there are some people that are just not going to come back to the poll. And
Hmm.
who is it? We don't know, right? It could be more to one side, it could be more to the other side. It could be relatively even to how many come out in the first place. It's really hard to say. But when you cause that many votes to basically disappear, that matters. And so I think that was a big deal. As far as, I made peace a long time ago. Now, Chase and I disagree on quite a few things, like pretty much a lot of his social, anything, pretty much anything related to um, the LGBT community, queer, trans, all that good stuff. We probably disagree on it. Okay.
Mhm.
We specifically disagree on what he's taking heat for right now. We specifically disagree on the issue of pharmaceuticals for minors as it relates to gender dysphoria. I oppose that. I don't believe that children can consent. Now, the question is like, well, isn't that a really big deal? I personally don't think so because number one, it's not really within the purview of a president.
Mhm.
That's, I mean, strictly speaking, yes, Congress could pass a law, send it to his desk if he were, elected president, and he could sign off on it, or he could reject it and enforce them, depending on how the bill was written. So, in the strictest sense, yes, he could play a role in it. But as a rule of thumb, I don't think most people are looking for the president to deal with that particular situation. Number two, he actually wants to end the Department of Education. And
Yeah.
I've said this before. I'm like, I can't think of a single institution that has done more damage and done more, to our children and done more to indoctrinate them, no matter which way you want to look at it, than the Department of Education. And that includes a lot of the trans issues. Like a lot of people might forget, the reason for groups like Moms for Liberty is because they didn't like what was going on in schools. So imagine if you started decentralizing schools. You might still have Moms for Liberty popping up, but probably not nearly as much, or more specific to maybe more blue states, if you will, or maybe pockets in red states where you have a heavy blue presence, where they're going to
Mhm.
be more supportive of these kind of policies. But the reality is, if he were to get rid of the Department of Education, a lot of these issues stop being issues because these national institutions have been corrupted. And these national institutions are the reason that we're dealing with this at the local level,
Yeah.
in the way that we are. And they're pushing him. So as far as I'm concerned, he's kind of got a clash. On one hand, he's like, well, we'll get rid of the Department of Education. On the other hand, he seems sympathetic to this medication. But the reality is, it would actually end up being that it would lose a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
And I think the trans craze, as I like to call it, with all the young kids, I think that would fizzle away without a lot of these national institutions uh, helping to back them up.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely on the Department of Education, and that's honestly one of the first things I looked at when he won the nomination. I was like, okay, does he have this on his website? And there it was: abolish the Department of Education, give the money back to the taxpayer. And I was like, all right, and that to me makes it all the more laughable, some of the criticism that he's getting from the Twitter crowd, because they're calling him woke, they're calling him Antifa, they're calling him all of these things because he wore a rainbow shirt at a Pride event, and I'm like,
Right.
listen. I literally study the left for a living, and I'll tell you what, you cannot be a woke Antifa leftist and want to abolish the Department of Education. Those two things do not go together, and there's no
Right.
amount of rationalization, no matter where you disagree with him on other things, you cannot want to abolish the Department of Education and still be woke, because the Department of Education is key to woke indoctrination, and if that doesn't exist, then that's just the way it goes. And on the trans stuff, like, I don't know, like, here's my perspective on it. And I've listened to a bunch of things that Chase has said on it. Now, I don't believe in any trans medical care for minors. I think I'm on the same vein as you
Mhm.
on that. I don't believe it should happen. But one of my biggest concerns about our culture right now is that I think this is an issue that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but it's one that I really focus on, is the attacks on parental rights in this country. Because
Right.
the fact of the matter is that the far left does want to abolish the nuclear biological family. They talk about this openly, they talk about it all the time. They believe that the nuclear family upholds capitalism, and so in order to get rid of capitalism, private property ownership, they have to get rid of the nuclear family. And from a highly practical sense, we're seeing attacks on parental rights in schools in the form of
Mhm.
policies in schools. We're seeing attacks on parental rights in terms of like there was a lawyer thing that like a big conference that happened at the University of Connecticut Law School last year where they were saying are parental rights in the best interest of the child. There have been all
Right.
these newspaper articles that have popped up. So this is not like an insignificant thing. And my kind of position on it is that you might not like how other people choose to parent, but parental rights for you to be able to prevent your kids from the school changing their names and pronouns without notifying you, the school
Mhm.
doing psychology on your kids without a license. Parental rights for you means that you have to support parental rights for everyone. And if you don't support parental rights for everyone, then you're kind of like walking into this trap that the left is setting for you because not only do they want to do all this crazy gender stuff with your kids, they also want to abolish parental rights to make it easier for them to do it. And so if you're the one saying that we should be able to decide how other parents parent their kids, that's actually giving the left exactly what they want and it's giving them the
Mhm.
ammo to advance their thing. And so what I've heard Chase say is more about medical decisions should be made by the parents in conjunction with their doctors and the government shouldn't be involved. And so from that perspective, I am actually on his team, even if the parents would make the choice to put their kids on puberty blockers, which I don't think is a good idea. But I think
Mhm.
that sort of issue we need to fight more on the cultural level to make it to
Right.
basically make it societally unacceptable to put your kid on
Right.
puberty blockers and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I kind of look at Chase and I would actually like to talk to him about this at some point. And I've seen this with libertarians that also happen to be gay is that like they don't understand the queer ideology is not about being gay, it's not about being trans, it's about a far left political ideology. And I kind of think that Chase like he knows what it's like to be a young gay boy. And he
Right.
wants to make sure that young gay kids
Yes.
have protections and all of that. And I think that it is actually coming from a genuine place. And he just hasn't been exposed to the information about the cultural stuff that's going on. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I mentioned this the other day to somebody. I said, This is my opinion. I could be woefully wrong about Chase. I'm just making an assumption based on my observations of him and my observations of a lot of other people. I think when it comes to issues like these in the culture war, and I haven't really narrowed it down to like the key players and who everybody falls, you're this or this or this or this. But I think that there are activists, there are rabid activists, and they are the people out there. They don't give a damn. They're going to aim for what they want. And if your child's in the way, then your child's in the way. If your family's in the way, your family's in the way. They don't care. They are out for what they want. Now, I don't think Chase is like that at all. Then you also have people who I think they, like you just said, they grew up maybe gay or queer or what have you, and they remember the struggle that they had. And I think they're kind of caught in a rock in a hard place. They haven't come to the realization that some of the most vocal among them are really not on their side, not as much as they like to think they are.
Yeah.
And I think what they end up doing is they're pitted and they're like, okay, well, you have this group of people that seem to be hateful toward them, right? Like what we're seeing with a lot of people on Twitter with Chase. I don't think that most people are really anti-gay. I think that they're so opposed to the trans issue that it's just coming out as we hate Chase, in a sense. And so, because of that, you're basically forcing him to make a decision. Do I stay with my crowd or do I stay with, do I come on board and come to the realization that actually this side over here is actually better for me and all the gay children in trans, I don't want to say trans children because I don't really believe that, but for all the children that are in some weird position, right? Whatever that might be, right? And so I think that kind of forces him to stick with his side, not realizing that the good and well-intentioned people are not the ones that have the control. It is
Right.
the activists who have control, and they are. I think these are the kind of people that have no problem saying something like, well, would you rather have a trans daughter or a dead son?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Very emotionally manipulative, and they don't care, right? And they're happy to make these kind of arguments so long as they get what they want. So I think he's kind of caught in a rock and a hard place, and he needs to just, like you said, he needs to have this understanding of what is he dealing with? Who are the people out there? Now, to your point about, like when he was talking about like, hey, I want to keep the government out of it. I think that is the absolute most correct position, because
Yeah.
what I keep trying to tell people, and I said this the other day, I said, you might remember that during COVID, when we started, when as the shots were rolling down and people were getting, we started out with the old people, and then we went to like those in the 40s and 30s, and we started getting, and then we were like, all right, maybe your teenager needs it, right? And they started talking about children. You might remember that there were a lot of people that said, if you wouldn't give your child the COVID vaccine, that's child abuse.
Right.
Well, guess what? A lot of people think that it's child abuse to give, like, say, Lupron to their child, to a child for gender dysphoria. Well, if we legislate that, especially at the federal level, which I'm extremely opposed to, if you do that, what you're doing is you're setting the groundwork for the activists who have control of the institutions to come along later and use that same legislation against you. And I would rather, and so this was like the nature of the argument that I was having with the redhead the other day, because I was like, I don't think this should be at the federal level. I think at best it should be at the state level. But I also think that if we didn't have it at all, if we just kicked it and said, all right, we're not going to legislate either way, and we're going to start tearing down some of these major institutions, Department of Education, and we start cutting the ties of power,
Yeah.
I think the issue resolves itself on a cultural level, and then we get it back down to where pretty much nobody's hearing about a trans kid anymore.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
I completely agree with you, and it's like, I wish people would, like, take a beat and actually think about what they're saying before they cause a massive, like, disruption on Twitter, and one of the reasons I've been so vocal in supporting Chase, even though I didn't actually support him for the nomination because I
Mhm.
supported Rechtenwald, is that just, like, the backlash that I've seen him get from some of these people who are just, like, they're letting their emotions drive, like, their
Right,
actions in this situation instead of looking pragmatically at what does he actually believe? What is he actually arguing for? And they're doing it for Twitter cloud and for retweets and like all this stuff. And I look at what they've done to him in terms of like calling him a groomer, calling him a
right,
pedophile. Like, I'm sorry, like some of that stuff is just incredibly hurtful and it's
right.
irresponsible. And there's no there just because he wore a rainbow shirt to a pride event or took a picture with a drag queen, that does not mean he's a groomer and a pedophile. And I really find that type of behavior just absolutely abhorrent.
It's not only abhorrent because it's untrue, it actually is detrimental to the people that want that say they want to protect children. Because again, what you're doing is you're doing exactly what activists want. Activists want to split they want people to have to decide.
Mhm.
And right now they cannot afford people who are sympathetic to them to leave their group. They need those people. They need the Chase Olivers, the people that I think are actually good people who just happen to have the, bad ideas and are, maybe are stuck in a rock and a hard place, because I think again, this is me speculating. I think people like Chase feel like if he comes over and opposes a lot of these things, one, it's going to alienate him from the group that has given him some comfort over the many years. And I think it's going to put him in an awkward place, because now he's going to, instead of being surrounded by a bunch of people that can identify with the struggles that he's been through, he's going to be forced to be on a team where there's a lot of people who haven't had those same struggles. And that's a very difficult leap to make. And so they can't afford to Chase Olivers to leave, and the other people to leave. And in fact, they need people to come from, if you want to go with the, the right wing side or whatever, they need people to come from that side. They need the parents who have a child that comes to them and says, Dad, Mom, I think I'm trans. Because there's a lot of good parents, I think, that are, when they hear this, like, what do I do? I don't, and then they start hearing things like, well, do you want your child to commit suicide? Well, no, I don't want to do that. And my goodness, if the doctor says that you need this medication and this is going to prevent you from doing, committing suicide, I better do it. Right. And so I think they're pulling people slowly but surely to their side enough to maintain power,
Yeah.
and to be able to utilize the power that they get later, when people turn around and say, well, we need to protect all these kids, let's push this law through at the federal level and not even think about what's going to happen when our enemies get power and use this same law against us.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about this. And Trendlin is on the XCOM for the Libertarian Party of California. She was at the convention and she said the Mises Caucus almost burned down the party by voting NOTA against Chase. This is another thing that I just found to be just really, really offensive. And it's kind of like, I look at Karen Ann Harlos, who I know you have a connection with. Like I used to like support her just unquestioningly. She and I know I've had a falling out with her since because she lied about me. But like I found this particular thing to be just like abhorrent. I know there always has to be a NOTA vote in the Libertarian Party, and I'm not
Right.
advocating for taking that NOTA vote away. But as someone who like, I don't know if you've ever been involved in like a ballot access campaign, but I was in New Hampshire in 2022, and it is a giant pain. It is a
Oh yeah.
giant pain in the ass. It is like, I mean, you know this, like it is a metric ton of people, a metric ton of volunteers, so much money. It's every single weekend. It is a near impossible thing. And I don't think that people who have never been involved in this, or at least have some like understanding, really understand how much work the Libertarian Party has done to gain ballot access in like all 50 states. It's a really big deal. That's why RFK came to the Libertarian Convention. That's
Right.
why, he was pursuing that, because his biggest problem is ballot access and it's going to cost him millions of dollars to do.
Right.
And so like once the reason I brought up Karen Ann is I remember Karen Ann specifically saying, like, after the Mises Caucus won, like, sometimes votes go your way and sometimes they don't. And that's just the way it goes. And you can't just like take your toys and go home just
Right.
because a vote doesn't go your way. Well, it seemed to kind of be a different tune when it came to Rechtenwald narrowly losing to Chase Oliver in that 6-round vote. And Chase just had like, was just a couple votes shy of getting the over 50% mark that he needed.
Right.
And then Chase came up for the vote against NOTA, because if you don't get over 50% of the vote in the Libertarian Party, there has to be a vote against NOTA. And the Mises Caucus wanted to burn the party down and have no presidential candidate, which would have really put ballot access in jeopardy for some of these states that have been working for generations to achieve ballot access. I thought that vote was disgusting. It's kind of like, you fought the good fight, you lost, it's very sad, but you don't take the hard work of all of these people
Right.
and burn the party down with you because you're upset that you lost. What did you think about that?
So then I think it was like 30% of the people voted no to, which was extremely high from my understanding.
Yeah.
I cannot recall there. So anybody that may be watching that's not familiar with Libertarian Party politics, NOTA always gets votes for whatever reason. And there's multiple reasons. Some people just object to the idea of voting. Uh,
Yeah.
some people just are like, you know what, NOTA, none of them are any good, right? And that like they have this weird like principled stand. My position was, if you voted NOTA because you don't like Chase and you would rather have nobody than Chase, and it was more of a personality dislike, then I looked at that as kind of like sabotage. Now, I think there are some people who I might object to their NOTA vote, but I think it's earnest. Like they might have been voting NOTA because they're like, look, I don't think Chase is. I've heard some people say I don't think Chase is radical enough, and I'm like, okay. And so if they felt like, hey, you know what? Not as a matter of, oh my God, my guy didn't win, right? Not as that, but if they just honestly said, I don't think that Chase is the right guy, then I'm okay with them voting NOTA, right? In other words, if they would have voted NOTA for any other candidate that they felt similarly about, then that's fine. If it was a spiteful vote because your guy lost, Dr. Rechtenwald, then I consider that to be sabotage, because you're sabotaging the entire party. Well, maybe not the entire party, all the states where they have to fight really hard for ballot access. So like Florida is not one of them. We managed to secure ballot access many years ago. I don't know exactly how it played out, but they got it put into law. So we don't have to have that fight every time we want to run candidates. Other states like New York, and New York's a big one. They're constantly fighting and constantly losing, I think, the fight there. And there are some other states where, it is a bit of a challenge. I think it's a big disservice to all the people, especially for an organization of people whose when they took power, when the Mises Caucus took power, They said, we want a decentralized revolution that's going to include local candidates,
Yep.
sheriff, mayor, city council, these kind of things. They wanted to push for candidates at that level to fight and help nullify some of the power that comes from either at the state level or even potentially the federal level. So I'm like, well, if that's what your goal was, why would you jeopardize and make it harder for that same decentralized revolution to even occur
Yep.
by notaing Chase? Now, I will say this on behalf of Karen Ann. I think she was in that weird group of people that wasn't doing it because they were mad at Rectenwald. That's my impression. I know that she had put out there. She said, by the way, if we had made a, if Chase had gotten noted, the delegates could have still made, a motion to suspend the rules and to change the bylaws, at least, temporarily or even permanently, to redo it. So the
Mm-hmm.
current bylaws, the way they're written, if somebody's noted, then if there's no candidate selected, then there is no candidate. Like if they get noted and they all get disqualified, then there is no candidate to they don't redo it. But the delegates could have they could have suspended the rules to make a motion to basically make an exception.
Mm-hmm.
So there was still that possibility. And if people were operating under the idea of like, hey, instead of staying until 1 a.m., we'll stay till 2 a.m. and we'll
Yeah.
we'll get a different candidate, a different group of people, then fine. I take no issue because that's common practice anyway. But I think a lot of the people, because there was so many, 30%, I think a lot of people were just like, no, we'd rather have no candidate because we hate this guy. And
Yeah.
and for those people, whoever they are, I don't have any names, but for whoever those people are, I consider them to be saboteurs.
Yeah, I think they're saboteurs and they should GTFO out of the Libertarian Party is my general and I agree with you. Like if there are people that are voting NOTA because they're against voting or like any of these things, like you said, that always happens. But I think we're talking about this very specific kind of like group of people. I also want to show people this because in New Hampshire specifically, the New Hampshire Libertarian Party was actually kind of celebrating the fact that Chase Oliver wasn't going to be on the ballot. But I'm going to give an example of this. So this is Jeremy Kauffman tweeted out, and for people who don't know, Jeremy Kauffman essentially kind of runs what is left of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. He's not on the executive committee, but he runs the Twitter, and he basically like tells everyone what to do when they just do it. So Jeremy tweeted out, Chase Oliver not being on the ballot in New Hampshire would be a tremendous endorsement of the Free State movement, attracting the right kind of libertarian. I hope it happens. Essentially in New Hampshire, and I don't know if you know this, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire voted not to dedicate any money to achieving ballot access for any candidate for this year. So they were just going to trash the whole thing. But luckily, we have Justin O'Donnell, who
Right.
is actually a principled libertarian. And Justin is actually taking it upon himself with a governor candidate that I'm not going to name because I don't know if he wants his name out there yet, who has said, I want to run for governor as a libertarian. I am willing to put up the money in order to do the ballot access. And it's actually happening outside of the state party because the state party is refusing to do it because the state party is so butthurt that they haven't been getting what they wanted. And so I just wanted to do a shout out for Justin because Justin basically ran the ballot access campaign in 2022. He was out there collecting signatures in front of supermarkets literally every weekend for months and months and months. There is no one that works harder than Justin O'Donnell. And I just wanted to like give him a shout out for that.
You know, the libertarians up in New Hampshire are just another breed.
Yeah.
That's really all I can say. The free staters, the ones that are involved in the party, for as long as I can remember, that's just kind of I'm just like, yeah, that's the New Hampshire folk. Like they're different.
That's kind of
Because
what you
they're
have to do.
yeah, I'm just like I don't it's I don't even know what to say because it seems like an entirely different country. You get
Yeah.
to New Hampshire and the libertarians there, at least the ones that I see, they're just so different. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever, and it's all over the place. And I don't say that in a mean way. I think y'all are kind of quirky up there.
Well, there are many libertarians in New Hampshire that I love and consider to be friends. There are many libertarians in New Hampshire that I will not go around, and I feel very happy about that. But I mean, we do have like our own little quirky kind of like thing up here. But I'm like, and I like the whole idea of the Free State Project. I just
Mhm.
wish that, like, if there was one hope that I had, and this is probably like a pipe dream at best, like if everyone could just stop infighting with each other over things that don't matter and actually start just like working together on things we
Right.
agree with, I think that it would be like an unstoppable force. And I kind of feel the same way with, Chase Oliver and his nomination. It's like there are a lot of things that Chase Oliver has in his platform that we quite frankly can all agree upon. Like having Chase Oliver as the only anti-war voice
Right.
out there in an environment where both Trump and Biden are going to continue to support, what's going on in the Middle East and things like that, dedicating billions and billions and billions of our dollars to this. I want Chase Oliver out there being anti-war. I want people supporting that. That should be one of our core issues. He's talking about, supporting Defend the Guard and things like that.
Mhm.
That should be something that we should all be able to rally behind. The whole abolishing the Department of Education, getting our tax dollars, like federal tax money, out of schools, like
Right.
decentralizing that should be able to be something that we should all be able to rally behind. But libertarians just love to focus on these little minor disagreements that we have
Right.
and make that everything, when in fact all that does is prevent us from ever actually being effective.
I saw just recently that that Rechtenwald tweeted out that Chase Oliver had reached out to him. I think there was a phone call or something like that, and offered an olive branch and basically said, like, look, you say a lot of good things about anti-war. I'd like to, have some of your writings and stuff like that. And it seemed that Rechtenwald received it well. And I just I tweeted back at him. I said, "Hey, awesome," because
Yeah.
I get it. If when it comes to Chase's positions on whether or not young kids should get pharmaceuticals for gender dysphoria, fine, don't work with him on that. In fact, if that's going to be your big issue, fine, don't vote for him. Vote for whatever candidate you think
Yeah.
is not going to do that. I don't know if there's one that actually exists like that, but go ahead
Right.
and vote for one that's not going to support those kind of things. Um, but if you can get behind him on things like anti-war, ending, the Department of Education, and a long list of other things, you should. We should be able to come together where we agree, and then just disagree where we have no choice but to otherwise disagree. We had a here, so I'm the chair of Duval County of Jacksonville, and we invited a group out called Florida Freedom Keepers. They're very, they sprung up, I believe, in response to a lot of the COVID vaccines and whatnot. And so they're very medical freedom oriented. And one of the guys came and he was like, I was speaking and he was like, "Hey, are you guys going to help us?" This was years ago. He was like, "Are you going to help us? Are you going to support Trump and help us uh, beat Joe Biden or something like that? Something along that line." And I said, "We will help you where we align. We will work together where we align on an issue," is what I told him.
Hmm.
And I think we need to do more of that and just focus on that. And if there's an opportunity, then seize it. And then if you have to disagree elsewhere, well, then so be it too, right? Like that's the way it is. And like Florida, we worked with the Green Party to fight back against an amendment to our constitution several years ago. And this amendment would have basically said, all right, the top two in the primaries, it was like a top two type amendment. And it basically would have made it very difficult for third parties to get on the ballot and to continue forward. And so we were able to push back against that. But we worked with the Green Party to come up with literature, and then we printed out the literature, sent it out to all of our respective, not all of them, but a lot of our respective affiliates throughout the state, and then just went around posting these, to oppose, this amendment for this particular reason, and we won, right? I mean, that was like I mean, there's plenty that we disagree with on the Green Party about. And I'm not even sure if they're like still active in Florida, but where you can do, because it could mean an amendment getting passed or not passed. It could mean a bill getting passed or not passed. And undoing those things is way harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing I want to say about Chase, and I want to talk about Angela's election and Mark Rutherford and stuff like that. So is like what one of the things I actually do really appreciate about Chase is that he's young. And
Mhm.
I think he provides such a stark contrast to like Trump and Biden both being in their 80s, Biden being completely dementia ridden at this point. And I think that, the fact that Chase is young, I think is a really good thing. I've heard him talk about, introducing young people to the idea of liberty. I think he could actually be an excellent like recruitment device. And I know the Mises Caucus won't like that because they don't want people being recruited from the Democratic Party. But
Right.
I think he can actually pull votes from both the Republicans and the Democrats, depending on how he's talking about the issue. He's obviously not afraid to get out there and, go to the county fairs and go to the town halls and do all that stuff and, shake hands and kiss babies and all that stuff. And I think that that's actually a really good thing. And I like that we have the youngest candidate out there that is going to have the energy to do some of these things and maybe even present a different image of the Libertarian Party that some people have seen before. What do you think?
I think in 6 months he's gonna be 10 years older.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
that's
yeah,
true.
it's gonna be a long 6 months for him, but man, he does put in work. I mean, he no sooner finished his Senate run and just, like, went right on into the next thing, and I believe he was the only candidate that we had that hit all 50 states, and if I know correctly, he's the only presidential candidate we've ever had that hit all 50 states before our national convention. So I think he's really raised the bar on our candidates, and saying like, look, hit all 50 states. And I don't know if he went to all 50 conventions necessarily, but I know he went to all 50 states, and he has got some energy. I don't know where he's getting it. He's 38, so I mean he's not like super young, but he's not old like me, like 45. I'd be
Mhm.
like, I'm out by 10 o'clock. I'm like, I'm just tired.
Yeah.
It's tired time. What you guys talking about? Um, so yeah, I think this would be awesome. And then that's just an opportunity for libertarians when people are like, "Oh, we've got two geriatrics running." We like, well, Libertarian Party over here, we got a guy that's half their age that's running.
Mhm.
Why don't you take a look at him? And so we'll see. It's yet to be seen whether or not he can pull the young vote. But if there's anybody that can, at least tap into that energy, I think it's going to be him. So we'll
Cool.
see. Hopefully.
Well, we'll see. Well, let's talk about Angela. Like my perspective on it is that I was glad to I think that Angela made some mistakes in her
I think
first term. I think that that's kind of undeniable, but I also think that, I think that Angela is a competent leader. And I also I don't come down on her too harshly for some of the mistakes that I think she made because quite frankly, I think Angela McArdle was handed an impossible task when she got elected in 2022. I mean, she immediately had like half the party was coming at her basically with figurative knives every single day. They
right,
were unrelenting. They haven't stopped since she got elected. They've caused all sorts of problems for her. And so, like, even the mistakes that were made, I don't think that anyone could have gotten elected to that position that wasn't going to make mistakes and that wasn't going to be sabotaged by the parts of the party that were unhappy about her being elected. So I was happy to see that she got elected. And I think that I really just hope that she learned from the first term and is able to apply those learnings moving forward. Um, I also actually really did like that Mark Rutherford got elected as vice chair, and that was not the Mises Caucus candidate. But
mhm,
my perspective of Mark Rutherford is that he just kind of seems like someone that's boring. He seems like a Ken Moman to me. He seems like someone that's boring but consistent and
right,
hardworking, and he has connections. And like for a vice chair, you kind of want them to be boring,
right.
right? And so, how did you feel about those results?
So I didn't support Angela for running again,
Okay.
which may sound kind of crazy, but here's where I'm coming from. I actually don't have a big issue. I have no big issue with there's like no smoking gun in my mind for Angela. The way I looked at it is she was, like you said, handed a very impossible task, and she had a lot of fights that she had to try to win. Um, my biggest issue was if you go back a week prior to convention, roughly, and then you start saying, okay, what's your record look like? Well, it wasn't very exciting. And I think part of it was the odds were stacked against her, and you had the takeover, and the takeover was very, very divisive. So from my perspective, I looked at it and said, okay, well, your 2 years was spent getting the takeover and turning the ship into a different direction. But now I'm not sure that because of all the personalities and all the infighting, that you are simply the person that can, now that we've got the ship sailing in the, definitely sailing in in the different direction. I'm not sure that you're going to be the person that is going to deliver on the next 2 years. I was not allowing the convention, which I supported. I supported all the things at the convention, bringing out RFK Jr., bringing out Trump. I supported these things because I thought they were good ideas. And I like the idea of taking a risk and seeing how well people can do. So I was very much okay with that. But I'm not going to consider that in terms of, okay, part of your 2-year record, because it's kind of fanfare in a sense. And I didn't want that to overshadow the challenges that she faced, because my goal as a delegate is to say, who is going to be the person, you got us from there to here. Now, who is going to get us from here to there? And I wasn't confident that she was in a position to necessarily do it. And it's not just, oh, she's a bad leader. It's, there's a lot of people that are fighting against her.
Yeah.
So I supported Stephen Nikayla under the premise that he wasn't nearly as divisive. He still had the same vision that she had, effectively the same direction, which, because I don't want to bring somebody else in and that's going to try to turn the ship to a different direction yet again. So I was like, okay, well, if Stephen's going to continue the ship in the same direction and he's less divisive, maybe this will make it more difficult for people to operate as bad faith actors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she got elected, so that's cool. She's there, and she's been promising that she's gonna deliver some more wins. Good. I hope she does. And hopefully now that there's been a little bit of momentum, or deflation of the Mises Caucus in a sense, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but hopefully that will make it a little bit, easier for the non-Mises Caucus people to start being a little bit more cooperative,
Mm-hmm.
because they were not very cooperative. Many of
No.
them were not. And the Mises Caucus, to be fair, in general, they didn't make it easy either. They didn't
Right.
make it easy for people to be cooperative. And so, but at the end of the day, if you're part of the Mises crowd, you support Angela, and if you want her to be successful, part of that success is not creating additional hurdles for her to have to deal with within the party. So those people need to go out and they need to start crossing over bridges and working with other people so that Angela's vision isn't so damn difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was my the way that I looked at it was just, is she in a position to be able to do this or not? Or is she just basically going to be the person that, um, she came in, she fought the hard fight, turned the ship in a different direction, got it going, and now we need somebody else to come in and go the next path. And that's kind
Yeah.
of how I was seeing it, but maybe not. Maybe she'll come in, and if she's successful in the way that she could be, then I will eat all of the crow, and I'm okay with that.
Well, I mean, I will say this: when I heard that Steve Nikayla was running for chair of the party, I was actually like, "Oh, that could actually be really great." Because I agree. I think that Steve Nikayla is a really responsible leader. I think he would have
Mhm.
been an excellent chair. I think it was just an issue of like he announced too late in the process. Like, I
Right.
mean, there was already like, and so it was going to be an uphill battle for him. But I do think that he was a wonderful candidate. And I think if he had gotten elected, he would have done a great job. He did get elected to an at-large position,
Mhm.
right? I think so. He's still on the LNC, which I think is a really positive thing. But I also
Right.
do agree with you. It's kind of like I really do hope the divisive, and I like listen, I look back again as someone that was like incredibly supportive of the Mises Caucus takeover in 2022. Like I loved the takeover language. I thought that that was perfect. But like there was something about it that like after it happened, it was like the fighting just kept going. And I think that
Mhm.
libertarians love to fight each other. If we have like an enemy
Right.
within the Libertarian Party, like that fight will go on forever and ever and ever. And it's kind of like at some point you just have to stop and
Right.
someone has to be the bigger person and say we are actually all on the same team. And I think that that's true for like the fakertarian side or like
Right.
whatever, like the anti-Mises caucus side. Like at some point everyone just has to say there are actual problems in the world, and the infighting of the Libertarian Party is not one of those real problems. And like we
Right.
need to focus our energy on things that actually matter. And but I do hope that now that there's been, Chase has gotten the presidential nomination, Mark Rutherford got elected as vice chair. Maybe that can just bring down the temperature a notch
Yes.
where like everyone feels like they got to win. Angela's the chair, Chase is the presidential candidate. Everyone feels like they got to win in the situation, and everyone needs to put down their goddamn pitchforks and actually start just like communicating with each other like adults. And so
Right.
that's kind of my hope. Maybe it's like dare to dream, but I really do like, I want to see that. I want the Libertarian Party to be successful. I do not like the Republican Party. I do not like I will not vote for Donald Trump. I've made this very, very clear for
Mm.
months and months and months now. And I quite frankly didn't really care who the Libertarian nominee was. Like, I was not going to vote for Trump in any way, shape, or form. I'm certainly not going to vote for Biden. I think there needs to be an effective third party in this country. And I think it could absolutely be the Libertarian Party, but everyone's got to get their shit together.
Yeah. And I think that now that we have, because you have the chair and the secretary are more Mises oriented. And then you also have the vice chair and I believe the treasurer now is less Mises oriented. Then you have Chase Oliver and Mike Termont. So for me, what that says is like more people have a vested interest in the party's success. So hopefully we're gonna like, for instance, seeing people. I think it's gonna be harder for people like George Phillies, and I'll say his name because it's
Yeah.
been out there, to send out postcards saying don't donate to the LNC anymore. I think it's
Right.
gonna be more difficult because now he has to sabotage some of his own friends, right?
Right.
Some of the people that he might otherwise support. He now has to, him and anybody else that's doing that, they have to come to terms with this is what we're doing. It's no longer, okay, it's the Mises takeover and it's all Mises oriented people. So therefore, it's okay for me to make this kind of an argument that people shouldn't support the party anymore. It's harder to make now because now you're sabotaging your own people, your side. And hopefully that, like you said, it will bring the temperature down and it will make it easier for Angela to deliver on wins. Because at the end of the day, I don't really care who's at the helm. I want the party to be successful. Now, there are certain directions that I would like to see the party go in more so than others, you know. Um, but even if it's not to my liking, I don't want it to crash and burn because someday somebody that I support is hopefully going to be running the show. And if we give them a disaster, then they're just going to spend their time fixing it rather than picking up where the last person left off and running with it, which is what
Yeah.
I really want.
Yeah.
So,
I heard, and I don't know if you heard this, but someone told me that, you know, basically there were like 16 states that were basically on the verge of disaffiliation with the Libertarian Party if it had been a complete Mises caucus sweep. And so it really is not an exaggeration to say that this kind of like, like people from both sides being elected to both the LNC and like the non-Mises caucus presidential ticket, it really may have actually saved the party because there were a lot of states that were feeling very disengaged from the party, were feeling disrespected by the Mises caucus, that were on the verge of just disaffiliating entirely.
I can't speak to anybody that might have been disaffiliating, but there were a good handful of states that were at least having continual problems.
Yeah.
And as long as they're having problems, they're not fighting for liberty because their attention is elsewhere. Like at the end of the day, you have so much time that you can dedicate to something. And if I'm spending my time, in lawsuits or arguing over who should be, in charge of our affiliate or, who should have the keys to Twitter or any of the fights that we've had in the past, as long as I'm fighting for those things, I'm not fighting the bureaucrats that are already in office
Yeah.
making legislation after legislation, these all these tyrannical bills. And I don't know if people pay attention, but they are not there is if there's one thing scarcity seems to not apply to, it's tyrannical bills. There's
Yeah.
just like this endless onslaught of tyrannical bills coming out at the local, state, and federal level because these people have nothing better to do. And they just come up with bill after bill after bill, and they're all over the place. And it doesn't matter whether you're left or right. There's a bill that's against you or for you. Doesn't matter. It's
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, we've been chatting for over an hour now, and I kind of want to like before we wrap up, I want to turn it over to you. What other things should we talk about? What other comments do you have about the convention or anything else?
So I think one of the things that we could do to help ourselves is when people, so as libertarians, we love to make challenges to things. There's an agenda. We want to challenge the agenda. We want to move things around because for whatever reason, good, bad, we're nitpicking because, the whole joke about being autistic, whatever, right? I think the one thing that would really, really go a long way is if rather than looking at everything as, a skeptical, what are they trying to pull? I think if we just said, how do I get what I want out of this? Right? Like what can, because there were so many motions where it was like, hey, I want to make a motion to amend the agenda to, put this before this. And then, people were flipping out and they're like, it was literally like, what's your angle? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you doing? And there's all this like skepticism as if everybody's got like this underhanded, scheming plot that, and I'm sure there were some, but it was all, it comes across as if it's more sinister than it really is.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, a lot of those things, if we stop approaching it as if there's this like sinister intent behind it, underneath of it, and just say, okay, this person has made this. How can I push this? Make an amendment so that we both get what we want, and we can find, and if they're willing to accept this amendment, then maybe they aren't being so sinister. And I'm trying to remember one example of that. It was what was the example of that? Oh, it was about seating a particular, so after we had our credentials fight, after lunch, at some point, people brought it up again and said, hey, we're concerned that if we don't resolve this through a series of motions and votes, then it could put us at risk for lawfare later with the Republicans and the Democrats. And the other side was like, no, you're just trying to overturn this and blah, blah, blah. And then somebody eventually made a motion. They made an amendment. They said, all right, how about this? How about we seat these group of people. We make this motion to amend this agenda in this way, or suspend the bylaws to do this thing, and seat them at the same time. So it was like doing two things at once, right? And hopefully, my memory is a little bit fuzzy on exactly what it was, but it was basically Group A wanted to do one thing. Group B eventually came back and said, how about we do two things at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
We do what you want, and we do something that we want that satisfies us knowing that you're not doing something underhanded later.
Mm-hmm.
If we would approach things more like that, one, we could get through these things faster. And then two, we wouldn't have to be so suspicious of each other. And maybe we would find out that the other team is probably dealing a little bit more honestly than we like to believe.
Yeah.
Because that's our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is that we're so skeptical. We think that the other side, every motion that they're making is to do some secret dirty deed. And maybe in some cases it is, but you can resolve a lot of that by saying, okay, well, if you want that, then I want this. And if we're both willing to, to agree to that, then maybe it's not as sinister as I think, and we can move along faster. Because
Yeah.
that's been our biggest problem at conventions, is that we just fight so long and we spend so much time on all these things. And I think a lot of it is if we're just a little bit more clever rather than skeptical of each other.
Yeah. I agree with that, definitely. I mean, like, listen, I like sitting through the 2022 convention with like all the different things. That was one of the most mind-boggling experiences of my life. And thank God I had my knitting, and thank God there was a bar just downstairs where I could go get a Bloody Mary every once in a while. And,
Right.
because it really is, it is like a marathon to be at convention. And I think that, I also think that I think the convention should just be extended another day. And I know that people have to work and stuff like that, but it's also one of those things that, like, if you accept the role of being a delegate at the national convention, it's just the way it goes. And I think
Correct.
that maybe if it hadn't been because the schedule is just a constant ongoing problem at convention, and maybe if there had just been another day already attached and people just knew that they had to be there for that day, maybe just a lot of these issues would have been a little less heated because people would have felt like they had a little breathing room. And then everyone would have gotten to go to the gala instead of staying to vote for president and vice president until 1 a.m. in the morning.
Right. I think they canceled the gala, if I heard correctly.
Something like, well, I think there were still some people that went. They just weren't the delegates.
Oh,
I heard
okay.
there was still food and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's just simply changing your mind frame, your frame of mind a little bit, just enough so that we can, get things accomplished. Because a lot of times what you fear is not really what it ends up being. It's kind of like when before the convention, people put out the Mises Caucus document of what they wanted to accomplish, and they were like
Mhm.
freaking out. They're like, "Oh my God, it's so terrible!" And I read it, and I was like, "Well, there's some things I agree with. There's some things I disagree with, and nothing is really that alarming." And I feel like if we can just kind of get away from our alarmism about everything,
Yeah.
then maybe we could think a little bit more clearly and we could conduct more business because we're not busy trying to, be alarmist. But I think that, and that's very normal. But libertarians like to say that we're, much better than all the other voters out there. We should act like it
Yeah.
and not be so alarmist about everything.
Exactly. I 100% agree. Well, DL, I want to thank you for coming on the channel and chatting with me, and thank you
Mhm.
for being a voice of reason. And I know that you have made some enemies on Twitter in the last week by being the voice of reason, but you've
Happens.
you've kept your head high, and you've been steadfast. And I think that that's what I really do appreciate about some of the people that I do still connect with in the Libertarian Party is like, yeah, there's a lot of crazy people, and there's people that wear boots on their head, and there's people that strip naked and run across the stage and all that, and like all the crazy libertarian stuff that I actually find kind of endearing. But there's also people that are just good, principled people that are
Mhm.
willing to stand up for things that matter, even if it means that we only get 3% of the vote or 1% of the vote or
Right.
0.5% of the vote or whatever it is, because it's not about winning, it's about standing up for the principle. And that sometimes is a really difficult thing to do. So I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, that's all we have for this chat. So I will be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. I want to thank everyone for joining me for a rare Sunday chat, and we're going to be watching Superman in the supporter Discord in a couple hours, the old one, not the new one. And so I will see you guys then for movie night. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon.